Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is TVP World. You're watching World News. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and these are the latest headlines. In his latest evening address, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy announced the release of 189 Ukrainian soldiers from Russian captivity. The freed individuals include defenders of Mariupol's Azovstal plant, members of the National Guard, and 2 civilians.
Бажаю здоров'я, шановні українці, українки.
We have brought home 189 more of our people from Russian captivity. These are soldiers of the armed forces, the National Guard, defenders of Mariupol and Azovstal, and our border guards, 2 civilians. I am grateful to the entire team involved in the exchanges. I am grateful to the United Arab Emirates for mediation. And of course, I am grateful to all our soldiers who replenished the exchange fund for Ukraine. This is the most important thing. We have to bring back all of our people from captivity, all soldiers and civilians, each and every one of them waiting to return.
The prisoner of war exchange between Kyiv and Moscow has resulted in the return of 189 Ukrainians from Russian captivity, according to the Ukrainian government. TVP World's Ukraine correspondent Oz Kataji is in Kyiv and has more.
189 prisoners of war have returned to Ukraine following a successful POW exchange brokered between Kyiv and Moscow. Speaking about the prisoner swap, President Zelenskyy said today on Telegram, "We are working to free each and every one from Russian captivity. This is our goal. We do not forget anyone." Now, the 189 returned prisoners, some of them have been in captivity since the start of the war, with people that were captured on Snake Island, and also those defending the Mariupol Azovstal steel plant, among those included in the exchange. The number of prisoners of war that have been exchanged, have been brought back to Ukraine successfully since the start of the full-scale invasion, including Monday's figures, is now 3,956 POWs. So that's quite a large number. And those families that have been lobbying so hard to bring back those members, their loved ones, from captivity will be very pleased they get their family members back before the New Year's. Oz Kataji reporting from Kyiv for TVP World.
President Joe Biden has announced nearly $2.5 billion in additional military aid for Ukraine. This marks the full utilization of funds under the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, with Biden pledging to exhaust remaining resources by the end of his term. In addition to military aid, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has confirmed that the Biden administration will provide $3.4 billion in economic assistance to Ukraine. These funds aim to support critical government services and stabilize the country. The announcement comes as Biden accelerates aid to Ukraine ahead of President-elect Donald Trump's inauguration. During the early months of Moscow's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russian forces abducted more than 20,000 Ukrainian children. Vlad Rudenko, a teenager forcibly deported during this period, has shared harrowing details of his time in Russian captivity.
Vlad, 16 at the time of abduction, was home alone when a group of armed Russian soldiers forced their way into his home in Kherson.
They said, "Pack your things, you are going to what they called a summer camp. You will go to get some rest." I took the essentials and left, and only a month later I managed to contact my mother for the first time.
Vlad was forcibly deported on October 7, 2022. The soldiers forced him to get on a bus which drove him to occupied Crimea, where he was subject to indoctrination at one of Moscow's so-called summer camps. When he rebelled, Vlad was severely punished and threatened with being sent to a psychiatric hospital.
They put me to the isolation detention ward without anything, without any possibility to use the phone, just nothing. I was given food maybe twice a day. I started having thoughts about cutting my veins.
Vlad was eventually rescued by his mother, who came to the occupied territory and faced intense checks and days of detention and interrogation to retrieve her child.
This window of opportunity for the children of Donbas and Crimea has already closed a long time ago, because this war, the capture of territories there, began 10 years ago. This window is now closing for many children who remain in the newly occupied territories.
According to Save Ukraine, Russia has deported 1.5 million Ukrainian children since 2014. Another 1.5 million are currently in the occupied territories.
Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said that Moscow is dissatisfied with the terms proposed by U.S. President-elect Donald Trump for peace in Ukraine. The leaked plan reportedly includes delaying Ukraine's NATO membership for 20 years and deploying peacekeeping forces from the UK and Europe to the region.
Prior to being re-elected as the U.S. president, Donald Trump talked a big game about ending the war in Ukraine within 24 hours of getting the job.
I will work out peace as president-elect. If I win this election, the first thing I'm going to do is call up Zelenskyy and call up President Putin, and I'm going to say, you got to make a deal. This is crazy.
Now, less than a month before being sworn in, however, Trump's plan for peace in Ukraine seems to be less foolproof than he originally anticipated. That plan, according to leaks published in the Time magazine, includes postponing Ukraine's NATO accession by 20 years and deploying UK and European forces to Ukraine for peacekeeping. In an interview for TASS, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov outright rejected Trump's supposed plan for a truce.
I really hope that Mr. Trump's administration, including Mr. Kellogg, will delve into the root causes of the conflict, and we are always ready for consultations, ready once again to confirm our position, if anyone does not understand it.
That position includes two main points the Kremlin has hailed as the reasons for invading Ukraine in 2022: NATO's eastward expansion and the so-called denazification of Ukraine's government. The latter has been on the lips of Russian officials since the night of the invasion, saying they want to protect the Russian minority living in Ukraine.
Our policy is based on freedom for everybody to determine their future and the future of their children, and we consider it important that all people living in today's Ukraine can exercise this right, the right to choose, all of those who will want it.
While the Kremlin said it won't accept the terms presented so far, it did say it would be open to further negotiations with the incoming Trump administration. However, if talks continue to stall due to disagreements, Donald Trump might have trouble keeping his election promise.
Impounding the ship responsible for damaging undersea power and data cables in the Baltic Sea is the correct course of action, according to Ben Hodges, former commander of the U.S. Army in Europe. In an interview with TVP World, Hodges stated that while the vessel may not be part of Moscow's fleet, there is certainty that Russia is behind the incident.
But this is what Russia does, and until they get punched in the nose, until we make them stop, they will continue doing this. And it only gets worse until we act.
And would you mark this incident as a clear escalation in Russia's hybrid attack against NATO allies?
Actually, I don't like the use of the word hybrid because it kind of puts it in sort of a squishy category. You know, the Russians don't think, hey, we're going to do a hybrid thing or we're going to do a real thing or we're not or whatever. They're always at war. It just depends on what they're trying to achieve, what part of the spectrum of capability they use. So until we get in the same mindset and treat what they do as acts of war, and then get the right policies in place, get the right laws in place, and have tangible, painful repercussions for the Russians, they're going to continue doing this. You know, instead, what we get are, oh, we're very concerned, or we need to examine this. You know, the Finns got it right. They went out and seized this ship, and that's what we all need to be doing.
Romania's newly formed coalition government, led by Prime Minister Marcel Ciolacu, is rolling out plans to control the budget deficit by 2025. Starting from January, new measures will be implemented with the aim of improving the country's economic condition. The strategy includes tax increases, capped subsidies, and adjustments to public sector wages and pensions. Additional changes will remove tax exemptions and incentives for sectors such as IT and construction. According to the Romanian finance minister, these measures could generate a surplus of approximately $26 billion by the end of 2025. Romania's current budget deficit stands at around 8.5% of its GDP. The proposed measure aims to lower that figure to 7%. German officials say the suspect in the Magdeburg Christmas market attack appears to be mentally disturbed. On Monday evening, Interior Minister Nancy Faeser suggested that this could be one reason why the tragedy was difficult to prevent. She emphasized that the investigation involving multiple German federal state authorities is still ongoing.
The perpetrator doesn't fit into any previous pattern. What is striking are the thousands of statements made by the perpetrator that indicate a pathological psyche. Numerous networks are therefore being investigated. We're relying on procedures that have been used by various authorities and the judiciary in the Federal Republic. There are tens of thousands of tweets from the perpetrator. That is the explanation for why not everything is on the table yet, and many federal state authorities are involved. It's not just Saxony-Anhalt. The perpetrator has also been noticed in other regions, and it has to be carefully clarified who knew about which information and what was passed on and when.
The president of Georgia, Mikhail Kyiv-Moscow, whose leadership remains unrecognized by democratic nations, has signed into law new restrictions on protests. These measures are set to take effect on December 30th of 2024. In a controversial move, Kyiv-Moscow also approved legislation that removes personal protection for President Shalom Zurabishvili. Our correspondent Don Arleth has the latest on this unfolding situation in Georgia.
32 days of protests here in Tbilisi. Yesterday saw the new president sworn in and inaugurated, that is Mikhail Kyiv-Moscow. Today, his first acts of the legal office of the president were to sign some controversial laws into force. These are amendments to the civil service law, which the opposition says it's going to be easier to hire and fire government workers. Department heads and deputies will be administratively contracted, another term for essentially politically appointed or politically controlled. Of course, the opposition is saying that slowly but surely all government institutions and workers will be controlled by the Georgian Dream Party. Also, performance evaluations will be conducted more frequently, and penalties can include salary cuts or the ultimate termination of the worker altogether. Now, these can't be readdressed in court if found that the workers were illegally terminated, for instance. They will only be able to receive a small severance pay, but they will not be able to regain their positions. These measures will lead to more political control, as I mentioned, and ultimately reduce the quality of government services and the quality of the government agencies. Now, also penalties for persons taking part in protests is another part of these laws that have been enacted by this new president. Protesters could be fined up to $720 for simply covering their face. Now, the opposition says this is also quite a problem because the identities of certain people can't be protected, which ultimately will stifle their ability to protest and disseminate against the government and its policies. Parents of minors who participate in protests and disobey for police, for instance, could be fined up to $100, and preventative detention. Now, this is the big one. Preventative detention up to 48 hours if police believe that someone may commit a crime. May commit a crime, not if they did, but if they simply suspect that they could commit a crime, they could be imprisoned for up to 48 hours. They can also be in this detention if police believe that they will not show up at a court date. So the opposition is saying here that the ability for Georgians to come out on the streets and protest could eventually disappear if more draconian laws such as these are brought into force. Reporting from Tbilisi, Don Arleth, TVP World.
And with that, we conclude this edition of World News. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.